Data engineering as a career is booming and there are so many high paying jobs available. Today we are going to have a conversation with Zach Wilson, who is a data engineer at Airbnb in Silicon Valley, USA. He has worked with Facebook and Netflix before as a data engineer, and he has solved so many cool problems in data engineering field. He's going to provide a career guidance in this video, which is part 1. In part 2, we will be discussing some data engineering interview tips. But in this part, first we will discuss how companies like Netflix and Facebook uses data engineering, and then we will discuss what kind of skills do you need if you want to prepare for a data engineering career. Let's begin. Zach is pretty active on LinkedIn with more than 100,000 followers, and I love reading his post about data engineering and mental health. So if you want to learn from him, please make sure you follow him on LinkedIn. He also started a YouTube channel recently. We are going to link all of those things in a video description below. All right, Zach, thank you very much for spending time for this conversation today.
Yeah, awesome. I'm really excited to be on the show.
All right, cool. So let's talk about what do you do at Airbnb right now? How does your day look like typically?
Oh, that's a good question. So for me, I currently work as a tech lead at Airbnb. And so my role is like I work with my manager on this because sometimes it's not quite like this, but my role is about 50% management and 50% technical contributions. So I really try to do both things. Like I work with people and teams to unblock them. And then for complex technical projects and pipelines, I will code those out myself and do that technical hands-on work myself. And right now, that's the big things I kind of work on. That's kind of like how, or at least how my work gets done. I work mainly with like Scala Spark, and building Spark pipelines. That's like a huge part of my job.
Mhm.
And then of course we use Airflow, Airbnb Airflow. Obviously, we have
Mhm.
to use Airflow, right? Because we made it, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and so yeah, I work work on that, right? That's like the big thing I work on is delivering high quality data pipelines, right? And so we really try to have a pretty thorough process, right? It's
Mhm.
very different from like Facebook and Netflix in this way, where like at Airbnb, like when you're building a pipeline, you have to write a spec, it has to be approved, and then like so you have to have like a pretty big like design kind of process, right?
Mhm.
And which is great because that makes it so that any like maybe upstream bugs or quality issues get caught before the pipeline is built. So then
Mhm.
we don't have to like backfill data after like we realize that, oh, we used the wrong source, or oh, we need to change this thing, we need to do that, or it now has this need, right? And so that it's a trade-off though, right? Because it makes it so the pipelines do take longer to build, but
Mhm.
they're just way high quality when they are delivered though. And so that's one of the things I really like about Airbnb is like their dedication to like data quality.
Nice. And data engineering is becoming a booming career, and you have an experience in big tech companies like you worked with Facebook before, then Netflix, and now Airbnb. So, based on your experience, let's discuss if someone wants to become data engineer and get hired in these big companies, what kind of technical skill and soft skills does that person need to have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a big thing there is these companies actually like data engineer at these companies actually is different. That's like one of the things that was kind of interesting for me to learn, right? So like at Facebook, most of the data engineering roles at Facebook are closer to a role called analytics engineer, which is
Mm-hmm.
an important distinction. Netflix and Airbnb are a lot closer, where like they are a lot similar. So I'll kind of talk more about Netflix and Airbnb, and we can talk about Facebook in a second. But for Netflix and Airbnb, some key like technical skills you need to know are like software engineering fundamentals, right? You need to know about unit testing, integration testing, continuous integration, continuous deploy, like how to write good, high quality code. That's a big piece. And obviously, you're going to need to know data structures and algorithms. Less than like at other roles, like you need to know a little bit less than like for like a software engineer role. Like in my whole career interviewing for data engineer roles, I've never been asked to invert a binary tree. I've never had to do anything with trees in any interview ever, and I've done a
Lucky
lot of
you.
interviews. Yeah, lucky
Because
me. Yeah,
those
for
are the
sure.
questions that make people nervous, especially the tree
Yeah.
related questions.
Oh yeah, yeah, and those are a lot more common in software engineering roles, right? Like for me, like I've been able to answer all of my like all the coding interview questions with like if you have stacks, queues, maps, and lists. If you have those four, and you know how they work and the trade-offs between them, between like space and time, and like when to use a map, when to use a list, when a stack is relevant, when a queue is relevant. If you know those four, I mean, I haven't even ever had a recursion problem in an interview. Like that's like I feel very lucky in that way. Like, but like I think that that's because data engineering is different in that way, because
Mm,
they like you don't need to have as much depth there as you need to have breadth in a lot of other things, right? And like so another very critical thing that you need to know how to do in data engineering is data modeling, right?
mm,
Understanding like what a fact table is and an ag table and a dimension table and slowly changing dimensions and all those different kind of core data modeling concepts, and knowing how to like take a business problem and maybe a data source and then creating those models and in a way that is scalable. That's another very common thing that is screened for. There's always at least like an hour, sometimes 2 hours on data modeling when you're going through the process of interviewing at these big tech companies.
I see.
That's a big, yeah. So those are like, I'd say on the soft skill side, there's a couple things. Like, I think a big one on the soft skill side is like being able to say no. Like, well, I guess that's after you get the job. To get the job on the soft skill side, you need to be able to collaborate really well, like, and just be a team player. Those are very important pieces of it. Other things are like kind of being able to persuade people. Being
Mm,
persuasive is also
mm,
something that I think is important, because that's in an interview, right? Is you're selling
mm,
yourself in the interview, right? And that's like
mm.
a soft skill then, but that persuasive skill is also useful like when you're actually on the job as well. So I think that those are kind of like the key soft skills for sure.
Nice. And it's interesting that people focus just too much on technical skill and they don't focus on soft skills, and then they end up burning themselves, or they don't get selected during the
Yep.
interview process, and they don't realize that these soft skills are super important.
Definitely.
All right, now let's discuss how let's discuss a few projects, or maybe one project that you have worked on, you found it very interesting, either
hmm
Facebook or Netflix, so that
Yep.
the viewers watching this video get an idea on how a data engineering project is executed step by step. So we can maybe start with a problem statement, then step by
Mhm.
step let's walk through that life cycle of a data engineering project.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So the project I'm going to talk about here is a project that actually delivering on this project was what got me promoted from L3 to L4 at Facebook. So
Hmm.
so when I started at Facebook, I worked on the notifications team and and I worked as a data engineer there to understand like how notifications like impact growth. Right, that was the main thing. We wanted to use notifications to get more people to come back to Facebook. That was like
Hmm.
our key thing, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that's kind of tricky about notifications, right, is generally if you just send more notifications, you get more growth, right?
Hmm.
But like it has like a trade-off, right? Because like if you send too much, then like people are gonna be like spammy, and then they turn off notifications, and then they actually come back less because they're not getting those nudges to come back anymore, right? And because
Yes.
they're like it's spammy. So one of the things that I worked on like in this process was like we didn't have that counterweight metric, right? We
Hmm.
knew how much notifications were causing growth, but we didn't know like the spammy side, like how much it was
Hmm.
impacting settings, how many people were turning off settings, how many people
Hmm.
were not making it so we couldn't reach them anymore, right?
Hmm.
And so that was a big thing to really help increase the quality in notifications, right?
Hmm.
So what we did was that was the problem statement, right? And that's what
Hmm.
we started with was like, hey, this is what we need to develop, right? and then those things, then I worked with like software engineers to understand like, okay, where can I get this data, right? Because
Hmm.
this data is somewhere probably in a database, right? Like in
Hmm.
a production database somewhere that I need to get all those settings, right?
Hmm.
And then and scrape all of that into a data lake, right? That
Hmm.
was like the early process, right,
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
understanding these settings. But it was more complex than that as well, because we weren't just looking at like push notifications. We were
Hmm.
looking at push, SMS, and email, right? So
Hmm.
all three of them, and they had different like settings and different things going on with them, right? And we had to like come up with rules, right? Where like,
Hmm.
because with email it was like, okay, they can hit unsubscribe. That's one way they can become unreachable, right? Because
Hmm.
they say don't reach me. But
Hmm.
another thing that could happen, right, is they like their email could die, right? Their email could be
Hmm.
dead, right? And then like it
Hmm.
bounces. Like so when you send the email, it just bounces back. And so that could potentially be another way that they're unreachable, right?
Hmm.
And so email had its own set of business definitions. Push had its own, and SMS had its own set of definitions. So they all
Hmm.
had their own rules and stuff. And those rules, that process was more of a collaboration with a bunch of people, right? It
Hmm.
was a collaboration with like product managers, with data scientists, with like also with software engineers to kind of understand like what those numbers should look like, right? And like how can we use those numbers to calculate like ultimately what was called like our reachability number, right?
Hmm.
And uh and so that process was also pretty involved, right, of understanding that. And then after we got that figured out, and agreed on these definitions, then it was time to like actually write some code, right, and actually like start coding out the SQL behind that. And that was a lot of SQL. Like that was a crazy pipeline. One of the biggest, most like beefy pipelines, even to this day, that I've written for sure. Like it was a crazy one for sure. And so we wrote that, or I wrote that, and then that data set then got plugged back into that A/B testing framework,
Hmm.
so that when the people who were experimenting on notifications, now they weren't just looking at growth, they were also looking at reachability. So they're looking at
Hmm.
both numbers together, so they could understand like, okay, we don't want to spam because otherwise reachability goes down. It's kind of like that. It's called like a counter metric, right? So
Huh.
that you can kind of get a clearer picture of the whole environment. And yeah, and that was kind of the project that I worked on that really had a pretty substantial impact on like how notifications were sent at Facebook. And then yeah, it also got me promoted. Like it was pretty great. I like that. That was a very fun project to work on.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
You got this
Yeah.
opportunity and you were able to deliver to their expectations. What was the database that you were dealing with? Was it like a big
Mm.
data kind of scene or was it more like a
Yeah,
relational?
so it's kind of both, right? So some of the settings, right, that were scraped out, right, were from like a relational database, right? Like a sharded relational database, right? That's where
Hmm.
all those settings come from, because Facebook's so big, it has like all these shards, and you have to like get all the shards and collect them all into one spot. And
Hmm.
then Facebook uses HDFS, right, and
Hmm.
like Hadoop like technologies. And at that time, like I actually initially wrote that pipeline in Hive. Like even though people, when they think of Hive as like a pipeline execution engine, they think that's like super old, right? Because they're like, isn't everyone on Spark nowadays? Right?
Yeah.
But like this was 2016, so this was a while ago, right? So like, but like that was what we used, right? And then
So in
mhm.
terms of programming language, what was it? Was it like Python or?
Yeah, Python. So Python was so Facebook has an internal scheduling library that's very
Okay.
similar to Airflow, right?
I see.
It's very, very similar to Airflow. And that was what we used to like schedule the pipeline, right? And then
Hmm.
the rest of it was just SQL, right? Or HQL, right? Which is the Hive flavor of SQL, right? And that was what we used.
Nice. All right. So now let's move on to some of the data engineering career guidance related questions and topics. Why
Sure.
do you think data engineering is booming right now?
Oh, that's a great question. Like, I think a big part of it is that people like got a taste of machine learning, and they understood like, wow, machine learning is powerful. It's changing the world. Artificial intelligence is going to rule us all, right? But then what happened was they realized, oh, machine learning is only as good as the data we feed it,
Mm.
right? And then people are like, oh, machine learning with low quality data is terrible. It's worthless. It's
No good,
not like
yeah.
it's just throwing money away, right? And I think a lot of companies, that's actually what happened, is like they wanted to do machine learning and they hired a data scientist because they thought that's all they needed. And then the data scientist is like, I can't build a model because the data is just not good quality. And that's
Yes.
where data engineering is, that field is coming more into the forefront now because of the fact that like people are understanding now that like data quality and like having good, predictable, high quality data is what we need to actually apply machine learning to do these like kind of automated statistical data science things that unlock a lot of value. You have to have that foundation put there,
Mm.
right? And that's really what people are starting to understand about the whole data space, is that foundation is very, very important.
And I was commenting on someone's post on the same topic the other day, and that's a theme I'm seeing throughout the industry, that a lot of these big organizations, they have data sets scattered in different places. They don't have data governance. They don't. Sometimes organizations don't have a tight data access controls. And with these, like hacks happening, security vulnerabilities, now everyone is kind of rushing on to make sure that data infrastructure is in a proper place. They have proper data pipelines, data governance, access control, and that is increasing the demand of a data engineer day by day. Now, traditionally, we had roles such as database administrator, or sometimes you would see a software engineer who would specialize in, let's say, Oracle or MySQL. So
Mm-hmm.
previously there was no like data engineer role. So now there is this new data engineer role. So how is it different from data administrator or just a full stack software engineer? Like what do they do
Mm-hmm.
usually, data engineer, in their day-to-day life?
That's a great one. So data engineering is pretty broad itself in some ways, and that like pinning down what a data engineer does day to day is tricky. So like I'm going to be talking more from the perspective of like what a data engineer in big tech generally does. But like
Mm.
data engineers overall, like the field is pretty broad, and I think that there's going to be more roles that are actually going to come out of this that are not just data engineer. There's like another one is called analytics engineer. It's another role
Mhm.
that's going to be like, some data engineers are analytics engineers as well. But anyways, going back to like how data engineers are different from like these other roles like DBA and full stack eng.
Mhm.
So a big thing is big data is a big part of it, right? So
Mhm.
data engineers generally interact with distributed systems, like, and like they're more likely to interact with them offline, not online, right? Online distributed systems is going to be more of like a full stack role. Offline distributed systems is going to be more like a data engineer. That's like a big thing that they do. Another one is they work with like data analysts more, like and data scientists. The consumers of for data engineers are more like other data people, whereas like full
Mhm.
stack engineers, the consumers are like often the customer, right? They're often like the people who are using the app, right? And which is like a who they serve is another kind of big difference, I think. Another big thing is like full stack engineers are more like building up the product, whereas
Mhm.
data engineers are helping answer questions about the product, right? Where one is more of like a question oriented role and the other one's more of like a building and like I don't know, construction oriented role. Like full stack is more about like building out the actual like the infrastructure of the app, whereas data engineers answering questions. I think that's another kind of big difference between them and DBA. I think the big difference there is that data engineers will work with data in like a bunch of different places, right? Data engineers have like a big, it's the, the three V's of big data, right? Velocity, variety, and volume, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, velocity, variety, and volume. Those are the three V's. And like, I think that variety one and the variety and the volume one are two that are like pretty different between a data engineer and like a DBA. Because like you need to like maybe you need to hit a REST API to get data, and you need to hit like you need to like pull in an Excel spreadsheet, and you need to like take all of these different sources together and merge it into one spot, and then have your data set, which is less common among like DBAs, or where DBAs are more like managing the transactions of the app, right?
Mhm.
As opposed to like doing analytics on it. So
So based on what you're saying, basically the outcome of what data engineer does, it goes into OLAP database, which is online analytical processing, whereas the software engineer, the outcome of their work is in OLTP, which is online transactional processing
mhm.
databases, correct?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, and I made a nice video on explaining the difference between software engineer, data analyst, data scientist, just walking through the whole process. So I'm gonna
Mhm.
link that video below so you one can watch it. All right. So now, if a person who is a, let's say, full stack software engineer, or let's say some, nowadays there is a trend where people with non-computer science background degrees, they are coming into this beautiful world of, data engineering and data science and things like that.
Mhm.
So if someone is trying to become data engineer, and let's say if they're preparing for that, like what kind of technical and soft skills would you suggest that those people focus on? We talked about
Mhm.
these skills already in the context of big companies, but this question is like a very general question. Big or
Mhm.
small company, someone is trying to build a career in data engineer, and if,
Yep.
let's say if that person comes to you, what would you suggest that that person prepares on, both in terms of technical and soft skills?
Yeah, that's a great one. So I think that like first off, I think it's really exciting that I both in big tech I've worked with a lot of people with a bunch of varying backgrounds. Like I've worked with data engineers that have like economics degrees. I've worked with data engineers with physics degrees and with non like STEM degrees as well. Like I've worked with people with like psychology degrees, data engineers with psychology degrees, which is really exciting. Like to see like the variety of people. I think some big things to look into for like just data engineering in general is a big thing that you're going to want to know is Python. I mean, like that programming language is going to be, it's so important, especially like it's more important outside of big tech than it is in big tech. Which is
Hmm.
something that I found kind of interesting, because like my jobs as a data engineer at Netflix and Airbnb, right? I've been doing like Scala all the time, but like through my experience on LinkedIn and talking to other data engineers around the world, Python is an overwhelming dominant force. It's like 85-90% of the roles are going to be in Python. So
Hmm.
like that's a huge thing to learn. And like one of the things I like about Python is it's like it's meant to be learned. Like it's a learnable language. That's like the whole point of it. Like it's easier to learn, right? I think that's a big one. I think another big one is around like storytelling is another one that I think is a kind of underrated in data engineering. Like being able to because like before a data pipeline is built, you need to be able to kind of explain the story of like why it should be built and what you'll be able to do with it afterwards, right? And that's
Hmm.
kind of more on the soft skill side of things, right? Where it's like, hey, if we build this pipeline, it will unlock these values, right? And then
Hmm.
kind of being able to explain that story to people. I think that's a big soft skill to learn. On the again on like the hard skills and technical skills, I think a big one is like I think the cloud is going to make things easier and easier and easier
Hmm.
for data engineering actually, and that like the days of like Hadoop and Java MapReduce and all those like kind of really tricky languages that were like really technical, like you don't really need to do those anymore. Like you can just SQL with like BigQuery and SQL with Snowflake, those things like that gives like most companies are going to be adopting that like
Hmm.
the companies that that adopt those things are going to do really well, like, and
Hmm.
that's why those companies are doing really well. And so learning like some cloud providers is another big thing, like so learning like either like AWS, Google Cloud Platform, or Azure, right? Those are I don't have as much experience with Azure as I do with like
Hmm.
GCP and AWS, but like those three, I think like learning one of them is another big thing. Being able to leverage those tools that they provide you is another big thing. So something that I would recommend is like getting some sort of like cloud certification from one of these
Hmm.
companies or these big tech companies. I think that will be another thing that helps, because no one does data engineering like on prem anymore. Like no one does
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, here's my servers over here, run your pipelines on it. It's all in the cloud, right? Like no one runs it on prem anymore. So I think those are probably the big ones. Like to summarize again, it's like Python, SQL, and then a cloud provider, right? Like learning about AWS, GCP, or Azure.
Hmm. And I think on a soft skill side, you of course need to understand your problem really well. That way you can do data modeling well. So all
Hmm.
those communication, having good relationship with your business managers, so that you get a better understanding of your business, and then you can build a good data model for your
Yeah,
data set.
yeah, and being able to prioritize those, right? Because like if you don't have a good understanding of the business, then like you essentially are just doing what you're told, right? And being like, okay, yeah, I'll build this one and then this one because you asked for this one first, then that one. When like if you have a better understanding of the business, you might be able to like be able to see like, oh, this is one pipeline, not three pipelines, or like
Hmm.
you can kind of get a like bigger picture view of like the business. And I
Hmm.
think that is another thing that is very important for data engineers to like kind of learn, is like how to do those things, because that makes it so that you can prioritize a lot better and deliver the most value that you can, like, because everyone has limited time, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there is so much to do. We live in an
Hmm.
agile world, like things are changing constantly. So
Hmm.
ability to prioritize, I think it's a big one and very underrated. All right. Now, in terms of resources, let's say if someone again wants to learn data engineering, do you have any recommendation on either online courses or books or websites that they should refer
Hmm.
to?
Oh, there's a couple there. I mean, like obviously I'm gonna gotta sell myself a little bit here. I'm building out a YouTube channel right now called Data with Zach, and I'm gonna be talking a lot about data engineering in depth. So that's
Hmm.
definitely one. There's a bunch of other ones out there as well. I think that like AWS has a bunch of really great courses on like the cloud that I would recommend, that would really get people to feel a lot more comfortable about stuff. I And then for like SQL's another great one. There's actually someone I know named Danny Ma. He has a
Hmm.
SQL class that I also think is really great. If you just want to like learn about SQL, that one's really great. So I think that those are probably the main courses. Like I wish that I had a better recommendation for like a more holistic data engineering thing, as opposed to like, here's three courses that if you combine together becomes
Yeah.
data engineering, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No problem.
Yeah.
And I read your LinkedIn post, by the way, and I feel like I'm learning a lot, by the way. Just yesterday, literally, I was just, like binge reading all your posts, like just going one by
Yeah.
one. And so, yeah, we're going to provide Zach's LinkedIn in the video description below. So if you want to, you can just follow him and you can get updates on all the cool things happening in data
Mhm.
engineering world. Okay, now what do you think is the future of data engineering? Look, it's very clear the amount of volume that businesses are generating is just going to keep on growing, especially
Yeah.
when we go into metaverse world and all the IoT devices and people's increased engagement on social media. All these activities are producing more and more data, and
Yeah.
hence the demand for data engineering and data science is going to grow. So what do you think, like in the next 5 years,
Yeah.
this field will evolve?
That's a really great question. So I think there's a couple pieces of that, right? Where I think one is like around that velocity keyword in the three V's of big data, right? So like this is one area that I think is going to be something where people are going to like kind of want more demand for this. They're going to want more real time analytics, right? They're going to want more real time pipelines. I think that's going to be a thing that's going to cause not a huge shift, but a pretty big shift in data engineering, because processing data in real time versus processing it in batch, very different paradigms, very different, and like it's like a whole new skill set you got to learn. So
Hmm.
that's like one, and the tools there that I think are really like, winning there are a thing called Apache Kafka. Kafka
Hmm.
is amazing, and the other one is one called Apache Flink. And
Hmm.
where Kafka is like the queue, and then Flink is like the processor. Flink is like the spark of the real time world. So that's one that I think is important to think about. I think another big one is around just like governance, like what we mentioned earlier, right? Where
Hmm.
governance and privacy, like knowing where your PII is, is it in adherence with the law, like, and can you prove that it's in adherence with the law, and how do you prevent PII from being like propagated to areas that it's not supposed to be, right? And like understanding that, like data engineers really should have a better idea about like those kind of things and like how that works. I think that's another big piece of this. Another one that I've written about a little bit is like, I think that low code and no code tools are also going to become bigger. Like, I don't think as much in big tech, but I think like for data engineering, like worldwide, I think it's going to be low code and no code tools are going to really be more widely adopted for data engineering. And I think that that's going to be another kind of big trend over the next 5 years, especially as these tools get better and smarter, you know? So.
And I'm seeing the same trend, by the way, in the data science world as well, where with all these auto ML tools, person who is a business manager, they will get their data set, they will plug it into auto ML tool, and the ML tool now, that tool can figure out, what is the best model. It will do hyper parameter tuning, and it will just train your model and pick the best one out of it. So
Yeah.
that way, a business manager who has very little coding knowledge, they can go ahead and build the machine learning pipeline. So I guess the same thing is happening for data engineering as well.